All right. Well, I guess we will get started. Thank you so much, Cassidy, for in the Fayetteville, Public Library for having these sessions. We really appreciate it for small business owners.
Oh, thank you so much, Molly, for being here.
Well, you're very welcome. And thanks everybody for attending. Today, we're going to talk about recruiting, kind of a virtual event, the last of our series. We've done business planning and marketing, and those are available on YouTube on the library's YouTube channel. So today we're going to kind of review the basics of recruiting. No way to get through everything today. However, we are going to kind of dive into what recruiting is, kind of some of the important parts, as well as some resources. So we'll go ahead and get started. So here's our agenda for the day. Of course, welcome and introduction. What is recruiting? Tips and techniques, job description basics, and resources. And so to start, of course, I'm Mollie Watkins with Comprehensive Consulting Solutions, small business consultant. I help small businesses in the company. We help small businesses with their small business puzzle, as you can see here in the picture. So small businesses may be in a different industry. They may do something different, but all small businesses have the core areas of their puzzle, such as recruiting, marketing, operations, and business planning. And we help small businesses kind of pull together those puzzle pieces and maximize growth and improve efficiencies. So thank you again for being here, everyone. And recruiting is a very important part of running a small business. Many years of experience with this in my prior career, as well as with a small business consultant, helping small businesses find and hire the right staff. So thanks again for being here. So to start, now, we weren't able to get the polls in today, so I apologize for that. I wasn't able to get that to Cassidy in time. So here are the polls. So we'll just do it in our head. And, are you hiring now or will you in the near future? And so we just have some options. So if you could mentally select your option. And it's just kind of an idea to see where everyone is at in the hiring process.
And if you do feel comfortable, you can drop your answer in the chat.
Oh, great. Yes, that's awesome. Thank you, Cassidy. So yeah, see if we have any chat here. Looks like we got somebody trying to get in there. Oh, thank you, Megan. Hiring now. That's great. Congratulations. Awesome. So to get started, what is recruiting? That's the question, right? And a lot of my clients are, what is recruiting, right? What does it mean in its basic form? And so here is from Indeed, and it's just the simplest definition. What is recruiting? And recruiting is the process of identifying, interviewing, and hiring employees. Now, there's another piece of this that we are not going to get to today. And thank you, MD, for your chat as well. That includes staffing. So this is a recruiting piece where we're trying to find the right talent and get them, to hire them. And the other piece of that is staffing, which is what happens. How do we onboard them, right? What happens after we hire them? How do we train them? What's their development schedule? When do we do our reviews and so forth? So there's a whole nother piece of this puzzle with recruitment in terms of staffing. So this is just one area of that. And we're really going to talk about the recruiting part. But staffing is another piece of that because we can't just hire them, right? We have to actually train them how we want them to work, as well as onboard and what is our future development schedule. So that's the basics of recruiting. And these are some, our next slide is going to be terms that deal with recruiting. Now, some of these you may have heard and others you may not have. And so you can kind of see them popping on the screen here. So recruiting and staffing plan, we kind of touched on this a second ago. Recruiting is finding them, right? How do we go out? Where do we put our ads? How do we find these people? And the staffing is the onboarding and the rest of the story, right? And there are, of course, when you get this presentation, there are links throughout this presentation as well as additional resources at the end. So you can absolutely go in here and check out this. If you've joined any of our previous sessions, you've noticed that I'm big about planning, and this is no different than any other category in terms of We want a plan to make sure we know what we're looking for. So how many staff do we need? When do we need to hire them? Have we run the budget, right? To make sure that their compensation and everything fits into our cash flow, as well as what are they going to do? So, we've got this great person and we went through to determine what tasks they're going to be in charge of. Sometimes if we don't do that exercise, we think that there's, all this time to do these things. And maybe once we actually go through this exercise, oh, maybe it's not one, maybe it's two staff, or maybe, hey, we need a part-time to start, right? So that recruiting and staffing plan is going to help you get an idea of where we're at and where we need to go with our recruiting. Job description, we are going to get into this a little later. That is a huge part of our recruiting journey. And a lot of small businesses kind of overlook that segment of the process. Job description says a lot, and it also tells, the internet and bots of what you should show up for. So a job description is absolutely very, very important. Now, the job description summarizes what the job is, right? What they need to have to acquire this job in terms of requirements, if it's an education level, if maybe it's, they have to have a certain skill set, hard skills, soft skills. We'll get to that in just a second. There's things that this person needs to have to work with us, right? So that's all in the job description, as well as compensation. And then I love to end the job description at the bottom with an about paragraph pertaining to the business, because remember, with a job description, you are selling yourself. Okay. And in 2020, and Denny did a survey that found that 36% of job searchers, when they search on a job searching site, they use the title of the job they are looking for. So keep that in mind. So if you're thinking, okay, let's say it's an executive assistant or an admin that you need to bring on, and you put the title of job as helper, that may not be what people are searching for. They're looking for admin assistant. So the one thing is, with that job description, we want to make sure that we're using something that people are going to look and find us by. It's very important on the job description. There's also a very neat stat that 52% of job seekers say the quality of a job description influences their choice to apply for that position. So we want to make sure that we're selling ourselves in the job description, not just saying we're looking for a hard worker. It's great, right? That's exactly what we are looking for, but let's add some additional words in there to give not only, the people that are looking at it, to make sure that we know what that person is going to be doing in terms of a job description, right? So we want to make sure it's very detailed. The next one here is behavioral interview questions. These are some of my favorites. We are going to get into these. I'm sure you've probably heard these if you've ever been interviewed. And a behavioral interview is, tell me about a time or describe a situation, right? I'm sure you've been in those. Tell me a time when a customer was hard to deal with. Tell me about a time when you worked with a team member to solve a problem. Describe a situation where you were the hero at work. It's a fun one, right? So these are all kind of questions where we're trying to compare what they may do in the future with us at their previous company. Because the one thing with interview questions, right, is we want to ask questions, of course, but we don't want to ask close-ended questions, meaning yes and no's. We want to give them an option to reply. People love to talk about themselves, right? And they love to talk about themselves and tell stories. So if we're asking questions, we're going to get a lot more about them if we're asking an open-ended question about something that they've experienced or seen in the past. So when you're thinking about a behavioral question with your position that you're trying to find the staff with, is what behaviors would work well for this position. And in the past, if this isn't your first hire, have you had experience with, well, you know what, we want to make sure they work well on the team, or we want to make sure that they can really problem solve, or they're, there's things that we want to see. Tell me about a time that you solved a problem creatively. These are things that can give us a very different idea than, have you ever solved a problem? right? So it's much different. My answer to have I ever solved a problem is of course, right? But my answer to tell me about a time is I'm going to give you an explanation of, hey, here's a time in my past where this came up. So behavioral interview questions are an amazing part of an interview. I don't know if you've seen those or heard of those, but I know that with my clients, I use those in every pre-screen. And we'll get to that in just a second, because I want to see what they've done in the past and what they're likely to do going forward. Structured interview is, this is a buzzword, right? Structured interview, you can look at this differently. A structured interview is we have a specific set of questions, right, that we've developed based on this position, right, and what we know about the job. And we ask every candidate that question based on the position. So if they're hiring for this position, they get this round of questions. This position gets this round of questions. And we usually have a pre-screen, which is our initial phone call, followed by the actual interview questions. And those are exactly the same. And in a very formal structured interview, we would have a rating system where we say, okay, here's 7 stars, and out of 7 stars, this is what we rate this person. Well, research has shown that that sometimes can cause a bias. So what I like to do is with structured interviews, we all have unconscious bias. It's about 40% of hiring decisions are made, right? That's crazy. We'll get to that stat in a minute. However, we want to reduce the bias, right? Because inherently we have our own experiences and perceptions, right? Just like with marketing, that, how we see the world, that's based on those experiences and perceptions. So with a structured interview, we could also just ask, instead of rating them, we could ask everyone the exact same question and compare the answers, because you are going to see things, you are going to see differences. You're going to notice from one candidate to the next a very different answer, a way they responded. And sorry, the pollinator is back. So I didn't know if y'all saw or were here earlier for Cassidy and our conversation, but the pollen has got us, y'all. So I'm sorry, I'm the pollinator again. But anyway, so structured interviews are very, very important. Applicant tracking. This can be very simple, or this can be much more complex. When I say applicant tracking for a brand new business owner, I mean something as simple as a spreadsheet, if that's all you have, into something more, of course, complex. Indeed, LinkedIn, all of these sites have some sort of applicant tracking system where you can actually add candidates. So use something, because we want to know who's applied, who we followed up with, who we've interviewed. It's a process, right? Who have we pre-screened? When do we have to follow up? Are there additional questions, and so forth? So now, if you are a much larger company, you're going to have some very complex and comprehensive applicant tracking systems that also have an automation in the background, so that we're constantly dripping on candidates in our pipeline, because a big part of recruiting, just like with marketing, is our pipeline. So we've got to always be looking ahead, always be recruiting. Because if we don't look ahead and we're surprised with someone leaving, we're going to be stuck in probably an awkward situation, right? So, part of all of this recruiting is just keep in mind, we want to plan, if we want to track them, we want to know where they're at in the process. And, we want to make sure that we're asking them the right questions. Filtering out candidates is very important, because even though they look great on paper, and I've had this many a times where they looked like an amazing candidate on paper. They had all the qualifications, the certifications, the education, you name it. It looked amazing. But then we added assessments, and we'll get to that in a second, and it changed the whole picture. So before we get to the assessments, I've mentioned Title VII here. As employers, there are rules and regulations that we have to follow to make sure that we're not discriminating in our hiring practices. And this details the law. If you do not know anything about Title VII, please take a moment and go and review this before you start interviewing. There are questions that you cannot ask. Stay away from personal areas. Don't ask about things that could lead to a possible, it could be seen as discriminatory, even though it may not be, right? There's still questions that we cannot ask in an interview. Now, with people, if you're talking to them and, you ask, tell me about a problem you've solved, and they give you, an example, and they give you more information, that's on them, right? But you cannot ask certain questions, and we will get to those shortly. Skill assessments. These are my absolute favorite, y'all. I love these. So there's different types of assessments. However, there's a lot of other different HR companies and online assessment companies that do these types of assessments. Your Indeeds and your LinkedIn have basic assessments, so keep that in mind. But these are some of my favorites. So when we're looking at candidates, I actually worked with a local attorney, and with her, she would only speak to candidates that were an expert at attention to detail, because the position that they were looking for, of course, in anything legal, was very detail matters, right? And that's all she would talk to was expert level, right? I have others that are go for proficient or higher, but these assessments, especially the skill assessments. So we have hard skills, which are kind of things that we've learned, right? Kind of industry knowledge. Maybe you have, 5 years of bookkeeping experience, 5 years of customer service, things that we kind of learn. You have with, for example, Microsoft Office, right? You have skills with Asana or whatever that software may be. Soft skills are more subjective. Okay, those are interpersonal skills, communication, active listening, very important skills as well, but a little harder to measure. We can tell on your resume that you've been at this, for that accounting example, you've been there for this long, you have these skills, because we know you use those programs, right, in your position. Now with soft skills, those are a little more subjective, but if we're asking the right questions in our, once we've kind of structured our interview, right, and we're asking the right questions, we're going to kind of not just say, okay, do you have this skill, but we're asking a question in a way to actually see if they really do, right? Because I can tell you I am the best map reader ever, y'all, but it is a total lie. Do not tell me about North and South, okay? Tell me where the McDonald's is, right? So, but I could tell you that I'm the best map reader, if that was a qualification, for example. It does not mean it's true. So we have to, and also it's subjective. So my thought of me being a great map reader just compared to someone else is completely different, right? So just because I say it, we want to prove it. And we can prove it with some of these things like the assessments, cognitive assessments. Now, a lot of small businesses may not use these, they get a little more expensive. However, problem solving and logical reasoning are a big part of a lot of positions. We can get to those. And if that is an important part of your position, we can still buy those assessments, right? And have our folks take it. Also, work samples. There are some positions where you're going to have a sample of your work to prove that you know how to do it right, that you know how to create whatever that piece may be. So with the work samples, we're kind of with these skill assessments, okay, we're seeing certain skills. And then, okay, for example, you say you're a graphic designer. Let me see an example of your work, right? And I don't know if y'all have seen the meme on Facebook where it has written on Illustrator, which is a software for, graphic designers and others for creatives. And it says, written horribly, need a graphic designer. It cracks me up, right? But it's true. They need a graphic designer. So it's one of those things where work samples can also help and provide, a huge benefit to making our decision. We want to filter these people. There's a lot of, in the soft skills, there's one other that I forgot to mention, that's adaptability, I guess, too, and emotional intelligence. One of the most sought after skill currently right now is adaptability and emotional intelligence. So there are also, those are soft skills, right? Those are very subjective. However, we can ask questions to determine if they are emotionally intelligent. So for example, emotionally intelligent question: would you rather have the job done right or quickly? Right. So there's these things that we can ask to get a better, outlook of our, of this candidate and determine if they're a good fit. Other soft skills, you could even kind of put that time management and organization. Those are big ones, right, that most small businesses are looking for. And a couple other hard skills could be technical and acquired through life experience, right? So, and some could be transferable across industries. So it could be, they're an amazing, they work with Asana, like that's a project management software, or, one of these new tools that help with project management. And that would apply to any industry, right? It wouldn't be specific, but it is a skill. So these are kind of the recruiting key terms. Now, this is not a comprehensive list, everybody, but this is to give us an idea of some of the things that we need to be thinking about. We need to plan. We need to make sure that we have an accurate job description. We need to know what we're asking people, and we need to ask the same questions, right? To make sure that we can compare accurately. How are we going to track these folks and make sure with their interviews that we're asking the right questions, as well as we're filtering out by skills. I love skill assessments. One thing is I usually get questions about personality assessments around this part, and those are great as well. I've taken them many times, right? I'm sure we all have. The one thing with personality tests, though, sometimes depending on the test, I feel like that it doesn't give an accurate representation. I know it didn't of me. I know when I got out of college, I was told everybody could get a job at this rental car place, right? Because they took on college kids and a management program. And I thought, well, that's everybody, right? I failed a personality test. And that was probably because I'm a very assertive person, and that was not what they were looking for. However, it's very disappointing. Not to say those aren't appropriate, right? If you've got a big team, you need to make sure they fit with each other. It's absolutely, but as a small business, a lot of my clients kind of start with those skill assessments, and then they get into more comprehensive, or maybe it's a cognitive assessment, and then, moving up from there. So just some things to think about with kind of the recruiting key terms. And these are kind of some of my favorite. Oh, sorry about that. Some of my favorite, I love stats. If you joined any of our prior sessions, according to Harvard, like I said, they do employee assessments and HR, and a bad hire can cost up to 30% of the employee's potential first year earning. Just wow, right? So we know that as a small business owner, we don't have a ton of extra money anyways, right? So we've got to make sure that we use that money in the most effective and efficient way. So sorry about that. With a bad hire, some people, it just happens, right? They turn from a unicorn and something happens in their personal life and it falls apart. That happens. But for most of the time, what I've seen with my experience and with my clients is there were flags. Okay, we could have ruled that person out, but we were either desperate, we wanted somebody in the body in the seat, we didn't properly filter them out, right? So this is a big one. And many of you may not know, with the staff, in my prior career, we run a lot of tools to determine how long does it take to pay for this staff that we're bringing on, right? And, that staff person can make $30,000 to $50,000, with a base, and then plus commission, maybe even up to 60 or 70. The one thing is, though, that we, kind of figured out with our tools is we may not pay for that staff for 1 to 3 years based on their production, right? And based on what the agent owner was making. So there's a big thing with, okay, yes, of course, it costs us money to go and find these people and onboard them. But if we're not filtering and then doing that due diligence up front, we're going to waste money in the long run. And also, it's going to take a minute for us to pay for this staff, depending on your industry, of course, and your business. There are different variables that play into this. So if we know it could take 1 to 3 years to pay for this person, right? We want to make sure we got the right person in the seat, and we're not investing in this person when we can be investing in someone that actually would be with us long term, right? That would get an absolute amazing, would be happy with us, and we would be happy with them, and they pay for themselves over time, right? So as a business owner, cash flow is important. The next one, and we kind of touched on this earlier, is 52% say the quality of a job description is very influential. This is huge. Okay. So if we're trying to sell something, we're trying to sell our company to applicants, we need to make sure that it sells us. And we'll get to the job description in more depth in here shortly. According to JobBite, 270 people are the number of people that need to view your job posting on average to get a hire. Now, when this says posting, there's free sites out there across the web. You can do free on Indeed and LinkedIn. Now, depending on your job and experience needed and skill level, that free ad may not reach the number of people in a competitive market that you need to reach. So there may have to be a daily budget or a monthly budget as an option here. But this 270 was also prior to COVID, and I would assume that this number is actually much higher than that. These two next ones are some of my favorites. Oh, sorry, I got a little happy with the with the PowerPoint there. Businesses can expand a talent pool 10 times by recruiting through employee networks, LinkedIn. Many of us are on LinkedIn. Are we using LinkedIn as a recruiting source? It is an absolute gold mine for certain clients that I work with, in terms of not only, yes, we have our connections, but you can also get premium accounts. You can reach out proactively. You can, do their free ads. You can pay for their ads. There's a lot of different options within this. There's also, there's premium accounts for selling, recruiting, you name it. So LinkedIn is a way. I know we've all gotten those notifications, right? But it's one of those where we have business professionals all in one place. We want to utilize that as a source. And then I had mentioned this one earlier, 40% of hiring decisions are influenced by unconscious bias. Wow, right? It's the same with marketing. We don't even know that we're being biased. So we got to make sure, if we already know that based on our experiences and our perception, we've got to make sure that our interview and our hiring process is set up in a way to reduce that unconscious bias, right? Because just because we have a bias doesn't mean it's right, and doesn't mean that staff is better or worse for us, right? So these are things to think about. That's why this whole process is very important. If we just ask, are you a good worker, right? And do you got these skills? Okay, cool. We're not really getting down to the core of what we need for the position. And we're going to use our bias. It's human nature, y'all. So we have to make sure that we're reducing that, the ability of that unconscious bias to interfere with our hiring decisions. Now, this is one of my absolute favorite questions here, and I'm sorry, statements rather. And this would be: a typical hiring process takes 36 days. That's sure, right? And that's a huge HR organization. Undercover Recruiter had a different kind of take on this. And if they actually come from a referral source compared to if you find them on a job board or a career site, it's 29 days compared to 39 to 55 respectively. So we're looking at 30 to 60 days. And again, this is probably a little longer now, and depending on the actual position, but literally that's almost 2 months that we're recruiting for someone. And I have clients that are looking for very specific skill sets and qualifications, and those can take 3 to 6 months. And in some cases longer than that, depending on the role. Now, if we're looking for an admin assistant with an entry-level job, we're going to have a lot more candidates than if we are looking for someone with a license, for example, such as a CPA. That's going to take a lot more work to go and find those folks, right? And we want to make sure that we are ready for this process. We have everything in order, and and this mentions the referrals. Are we asking for referrals? Are we asking people we know? Are we asking our employees, right? When we're networking, are we saying, oh, by the way, hey, I'm hiring. Do you know anybody? Referrals are going to happen more quickly. It's just like in sales. It is the exact same thing, right? A referral is going to close at more of a 50 to 60% rate than compared to someone that's a cold lead or, a prospect. So these are things that, we want to keep in mind when we're thinking about, okay, how do we go and find these people and how long is this going to take? So our next section is kind of tips and techniques. And these are things that, I've learned, and, of course, over my many years of doing this, as well as working with different clients along the way. And number one, plan. I know y'all watch me say this 55 times on the, in the other sessions. This is so important. Please plan. Please take a couple, minutes, couple hours, and kind of outline what your plan is going to look like. You may have done this as part of your business plan. Again, there are sessions recorded on the library's YouTube channel. So take advantage of that, but don't go into this without a plan. Don't go into this without, okay, I'm just going to talk to them and see if I like them. And that's a good way to waste, as we saw on the previous slide, right? A lot of money. So let's not do that. Let's have a plan. Let's know how we're going to find these people, where we're going to find them in terms of what sites we're going to do placement, what our budget is, as well as a complete job description, questions for pre-screens, of course, questions for the interview, right? What's your interview process? Do you talk to them? You talk to them and then someone else talks to them, which I would advise to have kind of another person, because it does kind of limit that unconscious bias again, right? So if you have maybe one person do the pre-screen and then you're doing the interview, it can really change up what the perspectives are. And a lot of my clients and I, that's how we work. I will, do a lot of the introductory and tracking and finding the candidate and then doing that initial pre-screen and then having the client actually do the in-person interview. So just remember, recruiting has to have a plan, just like anything else. So, and then before starting, I cannot emphasize this enough. Make sure your job description says what you do, or I'm sorry, what that, that employee does. This is very important. We'll get to this in just a second. That series of questions, we already touched on this. Make sure that we ask the same thing. Now that could be, how many years experience do you have in this industry? And the other questions could be, right, those behavioral based that we had talked about. Tell me about a time you dealt with a hard to deal with client. Tell me about how you build rapport, right? Tell me about a time where you didn't meet a deadline. Tell me about a time where you almost didn't meet a deadline. Tell me about how you solved a problem creatively, right? Tell me about a time you worked with a coworker to solve a problem. These are behavioral questions. We incorporate those into our pre-screen and into our in-person. And a pre-screen, you've heard me say that is literally just an initial call to see, is this person someone that we actually want to waste an interview time with, because an interview is much longer. Pre-screen usually runs from 30 to 45 minutes. Sometimes they may be 20 or 15, right? But usually from my experience, they're in that 20 to 30 probably, but range. So we're trying to find out in that time, is this a person we want to bring in? So say, for example, we're going through our questions and we ask them, and this is a question you can ask, what are your salary requirements? So if they say $4 million, right, that's something we probably can't do. So we know, okay, this isn't going to go any further, right? So we kind of weed out, again, that filtering that we talked about. We want to filter to get to the right candidate. And then, of course, we talked about assessments, use those, and a tracking system. And again, do not ask personal questions. And this is one of those where, I get a lot of questions. What do I not ask? And these are the areas that we, do not ask. And sorry, I don't know what's going on with my little PowerPoint there. So sorry about that. I don't know why that is doing that. That's the fun of technology, y'all. It has been one of those, days, right, where we're just going to look at this. Then sorry about that. We'll have to pop out and pop back in. I don't know what my PowerPoint's doing there. But these are the areas do not ask about: race, color, national origin, religion, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, pregnancy, disability, age or genetic information, marital status, or number of children. Do not ask. That it could lead to seen as discrimination. We do not ask personal questions. Do not ask them how many kids they have. Do not ask them, are you pregnant? Are you going to be pregnant in 3 months? No, these are not questions that we ask. What's your religion? How old are you? When did you first start working? What age? Those are not questions we ask. When we're talking to a candidate or an applicant, we want to find out about their ability to do the job, right? And these things don't matter. Now, when we're talking to people and we're in conversation, people love to talk about themselves. People love stories. So what we're trying to do with that behavioral interview technique is we're trying to get them to bring out that information, right? To tell us stories. Now, if they tell us any of that, that is on them. It's not something we can use to make a decision, right? It's just information that maybe they shared, but we do not ask about any of these. Remember that Title VII? Make sure to do a little studying on that. And I know many of you are thinking, but wait, I've been asked some of that stuff in an interview, right? And I know, and they should not have, but don't do it. As a small business owner, do not go here. Do not ask these questions. Stay away. There are so many other questions that you can ask to really give you a good idea. Is this person a good fit, right, for my company and my team? And those behavioral questions, not are, these types of questions. One of the for the research that I had read today was How much do you weigh? Who asked these questions? Do not ask that, right? But that was on a board, one of those job boards. I was reading about it and I was just blown away. We don't ask those types of questions. Okay. And if you need assistance in kind of, what to ask, there's a ton of research online. You can, of course, work with a consultant like myself or an HR company. And I have local businesses in the area if you need referrals. So, because we want to make sure that we are asking the right questions and not setting ourselves up for a legal situation, right? So as a small business owner, please stay away from these questions, okay? And then we're going to hop back to our PowerPoint. Now that, I don't know why that slide did that, so sorry again for that. Technology fun. So we talked about what we don't ask. What do we ask, right? There's a ton of stuff, and this is from Better Team, another HR company. And you can read through here. I'm not going to read every one to you. There's a much more comprehensive list too when you click on the link. But for example, some of the ones that really stand out to me on this is, have you ever had a deadline you were not able to meet? What do you think we're trying to figure out with that, right? Are they attentive to detail? Do they make sure they meet their deadlines? Things are going to come from that conversation and they're going to tell stories. Another one is, tell me about a time when you've had to adapt to big changes at work. In our, this past year and a half or so, our world's been a little different, right? So there's been a lot of change and a lot of adapting. So we asked this question to see, can they really adapt? Because if they say, oh yeah, well, we got a new M&M machine, but I like Snickers, that's probably not the type of change and adapting we were looking for, right? What we were looking for was more of an actual, okay, we had changes in the office. We went to remote work. This is how I handled it, right? So we're looking at something for a different answer than that. And I really love the, have you ever gone above and beyond to help a customer? We want to know that, depending on our business, right? We want to make sure that, our brand is being represented well and our staff are an extension of that. And we discussed that in our marketing session last month. So these are things we've got to think about. And I really, the one that I really love here, it's probably top fave, is tell me about a time when you've had to make an important decision quickly. What did you decide? What were the results? What happened? You could get so much information, right, from that question, because you're literally going to ask it. And I know some of you may not have had sales or had a chance to write some marketing session, but this is one of those where, they're selling themselves, right? They're trying to say why they're good for the position. And if they can't make important decisions quickly, that may not be the right fit for us, right? And then talk about a difficult problem you've had to solve. What do you think we're trying to figure out with that? Problem solving. We want to know, just because, like, remember that map thing? I could literally tell you that I am the best map reader. It is a lie. I have never been good with maps. I got a lot of strengths, y'all, but maps are not mine, right? If GPS goes down, I am just like, oh my gosh, right? So, but I could tell you that all day and you would never know the difference. So what we're trying to do is, if you ask me, oh, that's great, Molly, I'm glad that you are a really great map reader. Which way is north? I'd be like a deer in a headlight, right? Where is the McDonald's, So it's one of those where we can kind of test that knowledge. Now, if you ask this question and you're like, oh my gosh, they totally failed that question, you're just going to keep asking questions, right? You're going in a flow. You just go to the next question. You don't make a comment on it, you just keep rolling, right? So they don't even know that maybe you're just shocked at their answer. But these are amazing. Ask these questions, ask behavioral based or situational based questions. Do not ask about those areas that we just touched on. So we got a poll, yay. And so this one is, and I know our poll, sorry again, Cassidy, on that was my bad. Molly did not get those over to Cassidy in time, so sorry about that. But if you would, you can put it in chat. And Megan, I see your question. Thank you so much for that. We're about to get to a question segment, and so I'll answer that in just a minute. But thank you so much, Megan, for that. So just noticing that. So with these questions, you can enter it in chat or just do it in your head. What should you not ask about? There are some questions on here that you should, and some questions on here that you shouldn't. So of course, number one is a no. No, no, no. Number two, how old are you? Do not ask that. Are you pregnant? Do not ask that. Are you married? Do not ask that. How many years of customer service experience do you have? Yeah, ask that. Tell me about a time when you dealt with a frustrated customer. Absolutely ask that. Can you describe a situation where you worked in a team to resolve an issue? Yeah, absolutely. Great question. How much do you weigh? Do not ask that question. Okay, so good job, everybody. I'm sure y'all had that in your head. And well, let's go ahead and touch on Megan's question before we get into this job description. So Megan, and you did not interrupt. Thank you so much for your question here. So is there a good way to handle it when candidates voluntarily disclose this information? I try to change the topic quickly, but it happens a lot when I start discussing schedules. That is a great question. So when they're talking about these things, just like you did, you just go to the next topic. I mean, there's, if they say, what you could say is, what is your availability to work this week? That doesn't, you know what I mean? If you're doing a schedule and if they have anything, they can tell you, yeah, we've got this or I've got this. And then it's making sure that they can get to work on time. And that's a hard question because some people, Megan, they love to share and you get stuck in that right of, okay, I don't want to ask about these things, but you're telling me all this information like you're doing, just handle it, just okay, and move on, right? And just keep on with your conversation. So it looks like, well, I know you said that Monday afternoon you were tied up. So let's go ahead and put you on the schedule for Monday morning, right? So you can still do that in an elegant way. And I know that's a very vague answer to that, but you're handling it well and just kind of address the, okay, whatever they said, right? They gave you all this information that you don't really want to know. Okay, that's, okay, I understand. It looks like you would be able to work on Tuesdays and Thursday morning or whatever, right? So just deflect and divert to what you're trying to get to. So great question though, Megan. Thank you so much for that. All right. So job description, this is one of my favorite parts. This is so important. This is absolutely one of the most important things besides our questions. And one thing I find with a lot of small businesses is we don't sell ourselves. This is, excuse me, as a small business owner, we have to sell ourselves. So we can't just say, hey, do you want to work for us? We're cool. Because that's not going to work. Right? Unless you're some, Google, and they have a very interesting process when they're hiring and onboarding, but excuse me, that's not going to work for most of us, right? We're not as exciting and fun as that, so we have to be a little more creative. Why do they want to work for you? We've touched on this in our marketing and our business planning, our competitive advantage. That competitive advantage, yes, on the client side, but also, sorry, what is our competitive advantage with our employees? Why should they work with us? Why are we better than the people that sell the same thing, right? We've got to know that so that we can tell them about it, right? And show them what we're about. But also, if the job description isn't interesting, they're never going to apply. So we've got to, of course, talk about what's in it for them. And I think sometimes we miss that of, oh yeah, here's all the great stuff you're going to be doing for us, the company, but we don't talk about what's in it for them. And as an employee, we've all been there, right? We want to know what we get. What do we get for working for you? That's great that we got to do all this stuff, but what do I get? What makes you better? So is that flexibility? Is that autonomy? Is that we get to wear jeans on Friday, right? Is that pay time off, health insurance, dental, vision, right? There are all kinds of things that we can add. Is our compensation in line with the market, right? If we go to post our ad and we're offering, this amount, but all of our competitors are much higher, maybe we're not looking at this correctly, right? Maybe for this kind of job, we need to pay more, right? And I got the question yesterday of, well, what if I can't pay that amount? Well, we may want to wait until we can, right? Because even though things are not about money, if we don't have any other benefits and we're offering a low salary or a low base hourly, how are we going to compete in a competitive market, right? So how could we make this? Maybe our pay, we can't do much for that, but could we get dental and vision for our employees, right? That's not a high cost item. It's something that we could do to make them feel special. Could we add additional pay time off days? Sweeten the deal, right? But I would suggest that you want to pay them because this is a huge investment, y'all. So don't pay them some very low wage and expect unicorn work. That's not how this works. You bring them in at a lower rate. I understand that, but they move up and they make more money because as we've seen through this process, if they're a good employee, you do not want to have to replace them. It costs too much. If they're a good fit and they do their work well, and you have a great relationship, they're worth more than you're paying them. And that's with a lot of business owners that I've noticed is they're worth more than that. So make them feel special, make the employee feel like they're loved. And I don't know if any of y'all have seen the memes, an employee who feels appreciated will work harder. So maybe, you're not able to offer a huge salary, but you give flexible Fridays where you could, if you want to work from home, as long as your work gets done, we're cool with that. Or I've had clients that gave flexible PTO, which meant if it had to be planned, but I only want to work a half day that day, they would let them do that. So you got to make them feel special. Why do they want to work for you? Just please keep that in mind when you're writing a job description. And a job description, I always advise to put the amount of money in it. I know some folks are like, but here's the thing is we don't want to advertise this great job. And then we get people that are asking way too much money, right? And we've got on the job, at 45,000 and they say, oh, well, I need 85 for that. That's not someone that, for this position for us is we're able to fit, right? So give the amount of money. And if that's something that's embarrassing, maybe we need to look at, right? You don't want to put that amount of money. Maybe we need to look at what you're paying them. Maybe we need to increase that, right? So you feel better about that ad. So this is a lot of money bringing on a staff, hiring, onboarding, training, development, you name it. This is not cheap. So let's make sure that we do it right in the beginning. And it's not always, like I said, personal things happen, people change. Okay. So this is not a perfect kind of method. Things happen, right? But if we do our due diligence and we are doing all the right things to make sure we keep those, it's going to be those situations where, I work with clients that have had staff for 10, 15, and 20 years, right? And imagine, how that employee loves that employer because they've been there that long, but also that employer takes care of that employee. That employer makes sure that person is loved and cared for and feels appreciated, because if they didn't, they wouldn't be there that long, right? And so think about the money that you would save by just treating them better, right? Or offering them something that other people don't and giving them something that is important to them, because money is not everything. It's not, maybe it is to you, but to a lot of folks, there are things that are much more important than money. So just keep that in mind. Another big thing with job descriptions are keywords. And I know we got about 7 minutes here. Keywords matter. So think about the internet. If I'm going to go and search a job, if I don't have those words in the job, I'm probably not going to find your job. So do a little research, see what needs to be in your job. Also, we want to make sure that we are writing a detailed description, because when we write a detailed description, then we hit on all the keywords we need to hit on. So for example, let's say for a staff accountant, right? Someone who helps with different tasks within the CPA firm. We are not just going to say when you're reliable and hardworking. We're going to ask, have you done reconciliation reports, right? Give us an example of a reconciliation report. How often do you use Excel? When is the last time that you actually, use data in Excel? And then I ask, okay, tell me specifically what that was, right? We want to know very specific things. So that's all in our job description. What's your experience with payroll and the different accounting systems in terms of entering that information, right? So in our job description, we're really touching on every activity. Now we could list that, and you can see here in this list here below, we could list it anyway, but my kind of process and what I've used and had success with is a summary of the company up top. Just a brief, this is what we do, right? Very brief sentence, what the job is, here's the position, and what the ideal candidate is. And that can include those hard or soft skills. And then you'll see some that, hey, you're going to report to the director of da, 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 da. and you will have weekly meetings, right? So they're talking about the supervisor. Others, you may say, you see goals or essential functions or purpose in terms of, okay, quarterly, we have to achieve this sales target, right? Or we have to have this percentage of responded emails, right? There's all kinds of things that we could set up goals for. Compensation and benefits, put that at the top, please, because we're selling ourselves, we're selling our business, we're selling, everything that we have to this person, right? Our company, our service, our brand, and they want to be a part of it. So tell them what's in it for them, right? What is in it for the employee, not just what's in it for us as the employer. And then responsibilities, you could list those in order of frequency. You could see some in some of the larger companies where they do a percentage based, right? For, most of us, though, I would say literally putting, this is what we do in an order of importance or frequency is fine. And then requirements of the position. Are there any licenses that are needed? Do we have to have certifications? Are there specific skills, right? Do they need to be an effective communicator? Do they need to be able to type an email, right? And be professional. So there's things that we know that, or we should have known through our recruiting plan, right? That we need to look for. So just keep these things in mind. And then in the description with a little about your company. What do you do and how are you experienced and why should they work for you? Remember that we're starting off with, hey, this is about us. This is why you should work for us because we offer these things. And then at the end, we're just reinforcing, right, what we had said previously. Now, here's an example on Indeed. There are so many options with a job description. You can go to Indeed, Monster, any of these job career sites, job boards, there's all kinds, and actually use a template. Now, this is an administrative assistant, and use a template to get your job started. You can see at the top, they've kind of summarized what they're kind of looking for, their duties and responsibilities. Again, I like to have compensation on it. Now, on a source like Indeed, you can add that to your job post. So it could be, I still like to add it in the text as well as to the job post. So, but there are a ton of templates, everybody. So if I don't know where to start, I've never written a job description. Of course you can, get help with the consultants like myself, HR, recruiting firms. There's a lot of different options, as well as utilize the free resources on the web. So these are a lot of amazing tools. So a poll, you can use a chat or just do it in your head. What should be included in a job description? And these are kind of things we just covered, right? So essential functions, job purpose, supervisor, industry experience needed, effective communicator, those soft skills, active listening, soft skill, Microsoft Office, hard skill, number of paid time off days, and paragraph about the employer. All those things want to be in the job description. So, and I know y'all did amazing. And I know that we've already answered. I don't see any additional questions in chat. So we'll just keep moving on there. And then our last segment before we wrap up is recruiting tactics. So as part of our recruiting plan, we have determined, okay, we've looked at how much our budget is for this, how much can we spend on ads, what is our outlay, how long could it take? I mean, this could take, depending on our industry, like we talked about, and our job, could be a month, it could be 6, could be more months, right? So we've got to make sure we've got the funds to try to hire for that period, right? And then be ready for onboarding. So usually in small businesses, we don't have, a $10,000 a month budget on our ads. So it's a combination of tactics. Just with marketing, we talked about that, the buckets and how we want to have so many buckets. Same thing with recruiting. When we're recruiting, we don't just want to depend on one tactic. Now, unless we have an unlimited budget, then it's a whole different thing, right? Because if we have an unlimited budget, if we don't want to do these other things, we just pay the ad, right? We just pay for the ad. Now, in most small businesses, that is not the case, right? We do have a budget, and that could be a $5 a day budget. That could be, I have clients, probably the highest at 30 or 35 a day. So depending on what we're looking for and the qualifications, right, we've got to make sure that our budget matches in terms of a job ad. And when I say budget, when you go to create ads on any of these sites, LinkedIn Indeed, do offer free. There's also a ton of free postings that you can do. They just take time. But with Indeed and LinkedIn, you can post for free. Now you're going to get, of course, more people seeing your ad, more engagement, more applicants when we boost it. Okay. That's just how it works. But I do have clients that will start with free and then transition over to paid. And then of course I have clients that just go paid ads. But again, it's a combination. So here are some tactics to think about when you're trying to recruit. LinkedIn, again, this isn't just ads. This is also, you can get a month free on premium. Send out some messages to folks that kind of meet who you're looking for, right? You can go look at their LinkedIn. You can find out a lot of information. There's also skimming tools that can go in and pull contact information out of LinkedIn, right? There are so many, so AI is amazing, right? Technology is amazing to help us with some of these things. Indeed or Simply Hired, same thing. Indeed does free ads. Of course, we get better traction when we boost it. It's a daily budget, a monthly budget, depending on your industry. Indeed also does pay for applicants as well as LinkedIn. So it could be a daily budget in terms of clicks for people who click on it, or it could be an application budget. So it just depends on the site and which way you go. Career Builder, Glassdoor, ZipRecruiter, I'm sure we've heard of those. My experience, we have used those, but for my clients currently that I am actively helping with the recruiting activities, Indeed and LinkedIn and Facebook, surprisingly. And you will never believe this, Craigslist. I know, like, is that even around? So it is. And you do have to pay now, but I have clients that find staff there. So it's what works best for you. You've got to do trial and error. I'm not going to read everything on this page here, but we have to use trial and error. Now, there is a lot more to this recruiting than just what we've covered today, but we have an hour, right? So we kind of did the recruiting 101. But when we're thinking about the recruiting and thinking about, okay, we put our plan together, we've got our job description, we've got our questions, we know what we're going to ask in the interview, we know how we're going to track our applicants, right? Now we're going to actually post our jobs, or we're going to, networking groups. We are going to work community events, go to job fairs, work with a complimentary business that, hey, we're going to sponsor them lunch and see if they know anyone. There's a lot of creative ways to do this besides just job ads, right? Handshake is the platform for the University U of A. And that is a way where if you're looking for an intern, or if you're looking for, universities, people that went to the university, you can actually apply to be on their system, right? It's a free posting. So there are a lot of options in terms of how to find people. It doesn't just have to be paid. Now we are, if we have a lot of time, then we can do it on our own, right? If we have little time and a bigger budget, we're going to use a lot more paid tactics. But again, the biggest things that we've had success with is LinkedIn, Indeed, as well as Facebook. And I know that's surprising, Facebook, but for certain positions, when people are scrolling through their feed, we have a huge reach and a low cost compared to some of these other sites. Now, it's not appropriate for every business. It just depends on your business, your industry, and what you're looking for, but it is an option. And also, do we have a career page on our website? Do we have something, that is on the website that if I'm just out looking and I'm like, oh, I want to work for these people, can I just hit a button and send you a message or apply or whatever? So make sure you have that as well. And make sure you take advantage of any free. On Facebook, you can post your job. On LinkedIn, you can post your job, right? Indeed, post your job for free. Take advantage of free. Absolutely. And then, determine if the paid options or a combination of these will help you get to your recruiting goal. And don't forget staffing, right? Because after we hire them, what happens after that? So these are kind of some resources so that when you get this, you're, actually going to be able to click on this. So there's a ton of resources in this document. I've already mentioned some templates. There's some job description creators where you can play with. And there's also a template from Microsoft that I thought was very interesting. And it actually is a job description template, right? So, and there's of course from Indeed and LinkedIn and all these places, but these are ways to do some research, try to figure out, what am I going to write? What am I going to say? What am I going to ask? Where am I going to put my ads, right? And what's the process when I actually hire somebody? So, And of course, you can hire someone like, Comprehensive Consulting us to help you with this process. There's recruiters, of course, as well as HR companies that do this. If you need any local recommendations, please let me know. I do work with a network of professionals in the area. So, but we love to help our clients with it's fun. I know that sounds weird, right? But I love to talk to people. Don't know if y'all could tell that. So I love to talk and get to know folks and help people find the right talent for their company. And that's, for me, that's fun, right? Everybody else isn't going to feel that way. So if you don't think it's fun, then hire someone, get some help, right? Get another person in your business to help with this process. And one other thing that I wanted before we wrap this up, and I know, let's see here, 11:05, I'm so sorry, a little late. Before we wrap this up, one thing to think about is if you're about to hire, there are some things besides hiring that I want you to think about. Workers' compensation is one that please talk to your insurance agent about. We need to make sure that you have proper coverage, as well as employee agreements. What do they agree to when they come? And if maybe you're hiring them as an independent contractor to start in certain positions, right, in companies, I've seen that happen, and then they convert to an employee. Where is your independent contractor agreement? What are the protections? How are problems resolved, right? How does that work? So we need to make sure that we are protected from a legal perspective as well as an insurance perspective. And then as well as an employee handbook. If you are recruiting and you don't have an employee handbook, we need to get on that. There's a ton of templates online. Make sure that you have, excuse me, a template, or I'm sorry, an employee handbook. You can start from a template because we got to know what are our processes and procedures and how do things work. Everything that we are doing and every process needs to go in an employee handbook, as well as job descriptions, so that every person that works there, you may not put the comp on that right in the employee handbook, but you put everything else on it in terms of the job description. So those are just a couple of things to think of from recruiting is think about your insurance, right? Think about the things that from a legal side, and of course, I'm not an attorney, right, or legal representative, right? But just from my experience, what I've noticed, and I do have as well local attorneys and so forth that can help with those if y'all need some referrals. So again, I don't see any. Let's see if we have any other questions in chat here. I don't see any. So we're going to keep flowing, and sorry, just a couple minutes late here, everybody. And y'all know I love to end with a quote. So this is one from Maya Angelou, and she's a poet, right? And has done some other things, but I love this quote. So I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people never forget how you made them feel. Is that not amazing? So don't just think of this from the client side, think of this as an employee side too. They're not going to forget how you make them feel. So treat them right, make them feel special, right? And show them how much you care. Looks like we just got a chat. And MD, yes, sir, we did get a recording, MD or ma'am. So that will be available. Cassidy and the library team will send that out with a link to the YouTube presentation. They'll send out the presentation as well as a link. So great question, MD. So remember this quote, make them feel special, show them how you feel, and you're very welcome, MD. And, just really think about your recruiting journey. This is part of the entrepreneurial journey that you have set into with a small business, right? Just think about for recruiting, I want to get people, I want to keep people. How do I do that? And don't forget this. They never forget how you make them feel. Very important. I love this quote. So one of my favorites, right? Let's see if we got any more questions. Okay, looks like they were good there. And then, of course, thank you all so much for your time, your questions, your engagement. Really have enjoyed hosting these several training sessions with small business owners. Thank you so much to the library, Cassie and Kelly and the team for putting on these sessions to make sure that our small businesses have education about areas that they may not be as familiar with, right? So again, thank you. And Cassidy, thank you so much for getting this together, and the team there. We really appreciate you.
Thank you too, Molly. This has been a great session. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Cassidy. I hope everybody has a great day and a wonderful week. Thank you.
You
Have a good
too.
day.